Hello. Hi again.
Oh,
Chat and we lost someone.
I am here. I just had trouble with my mic.
Okay. And so there was someone else that had just joined and then they um dropped right away. We'll see. Give it like one more minute here. How's your day going?
Very well, thank you. How about
Very good. Yeah. Nice day here. I live up in Michigan. Yesterday we got an extreme amount of rain, some flooding.
we had quite a storm here. We're in Virginia. We had quite a storm roll through too. Lots of
Yeah,
lightning and
Hmm.
you probably sent it down to us.
You're in Virginia as well, Tim. Are you guys on
Uh,
the same team?
yes, where I'm in West Virginia. Uh, Chad's over where there's too many people.
Yeah, yeah, it must have been that one. My neighbors just texted me a picture, my neighbors next to me, and they found a pretty large, like this big, koi fish dead
Oh
in
wow!
the stream that's in between our property, which
Oh wow!
that I wonder how that got there, but the flooding was pretty bad, so somebody.
Probably floated out of somebody's pond, probably.
Yeah, I know they can be invasive. Okay, so let me share my screen and get started here. Hi, Melinda. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Um, this is FutureFeed training 2 for end users. Okay, so today I'm going to be covering the second portion of the tool, and I'm sure you guys have heard this. This session is being recorded, so you'll get a link to that recording. Do let me know if the link doesn't work. If you end up wanting to watch our recorded session and the link's not working, just let me know. Someone reported that to me a couple hours ago. I got to look into if there's an issue going on, but hopefully not. Anyway, let's get started. Feel free to stop me along the way, and I love just talking and helping you guys out. So ask any sort of questions. I don't have any meetings immediately following this, so if we go over, that's fine. But I won't go over because I'll respect your time. I'll end on time, but I could stay longer. Um, and let's share my screen. Okay, so we're gonna go over assess, SSP, your future feed and deliverables. In the first session, I would have covered dashboard, start, people, tools, and documents and left off about there. So I'm going to cover the rest of the tool today. And then you will have completed our end user training. But you're more than welcome to continue signing up for these sessions, especially when you start using the tool. And if you forget something, feel free to sign up for a session and start asking about that area of the tool. um if not, you guys can join the Thursday sessions. We have a Thursday afternoon session every week where you can ask me questions, and I am working on producing some video content, so hopefully that will be out here in the next couple months. And just to kind of give you like the big picture of how we recommend approaching future feed. I don't know if I mentioned this in the first session, so I'm sorry, but I want to give it to you now. Is that, you could start filling out future feed however you want to. If you happen to already know, the status of your requirements and where you need POAM items made. If you've had that basic or gap assessment, or you already have SSP developed, you could just start copying and pasting that data into the assess field or the assess section here of future feed. Or if you don't have that information, or you kind of want to just kind of reevaluate your level of compliance yourself instead of relying on an external basic assessment or something like that, um, then our recommended approach to populating FutureFeed is that you fill out the people section. So that way, all throughout FutureFeed, you can start using that RACI model and assigning people responsibility or assigning people to the RACI model. If you want to be able to, assign a person, a team, or a role to a RACI model, you have to define it first in FutureFeed. And so that's why we say start with people, start defining the roles, start defining the teams and the individuals. So then you could start using that RACI model. It's everywhere. It's in your tools, documents, it's in the assess, it's in your POAM, it's everywhere. And it's very much needed. So then after you define your people, then move on to tools. And when you start defining your technology and your tools and your assets, I had mentioned to start tagging the assets in the connect area, start tagging them and connecting to the requirements. You're building out that body of evidence. That was an important step. Because as you log your tools, once you're done logging all your tools and you establish all the requirements, then move on to documents and start logging all your documents and establishing them to the requirements. And then that brings us to this assess page. And what we're going to talk about right now is conducting an assessment. And so if you approached FutureFeed like we had talked about, filling out people, tools, and documents, then when you've gotten to this point and if you've done all that work, when you get to this point, then your controls, all these requirements, you're going to see they're all marked like they won't have any status results if you're just getting to this page. Um, but they will be associated with the documents and the technology because when you added the tools, you made the connections. When you added the documents, you made you made the connections. And so under examine is where you're going to see your documents, and under the test is where you're going to see your tools. And the purpose of making that like establishing that connection between the tool and the document and the requirement is so when you do your assessment, if you're doing it yourself or you're reevaluating it or looking at these requirements yourself, for example, let's go to like an easy one. What is this one? I guess I always use this one. We'll just use this one. So limit unsuccessful logon attempts. If I was trying to figure out and evaluate this requirement, the first thing I'm going to do is look at the objectives. The means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is defined. Well, I may not be sure if it's defined. I may not be sure. That's poor grammar. Sorry. I may not know of, a document that defines this, but did I happen to connect a document to this requirement when I was doing that work in the documents section? So if I scroll down, I see that I did link a access control policy. So then I'm going to click on it, and then I would look at this access control policy to see if it defines what I need it to in that objective, which is a limit of unsuccessful logon attempts. So I'll go back to that objective. The means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is defined. So I'd look at that document to see if it's defined. And if it is, I'm going to go ahead and mark it met. Ignore this. So I would mark it met. And then I would go to my statement and I'd have to type that up. In the objective statement area, what you're doing here is being very clear for the purpose of an assessor, but also for the purpose of your own company and making sure that there's no gaps in your compliance. So whenever you're working on implementing the requirements or evaluating the requirements, you should do so at the objective level. If you've not gone through a CMMC assessment yet, or know how that whole process of scoring happens, is if you fail one objective in a requirement, then you end up failing the overall requirement. So if you fail one of these objectives, you fail the requirement. There's 2 exceptions where there's some partial credit allowed. There's 2 requirements where you can get partial credit, which means if you do fail one of the objectives, you could still get a couple points. But 2 of them only. So all 108, the rest of them, if you fail one objective, you fail the overall requirement. So do try to always address every objective. And then if you address every objective, it's also going to make your assessment that much smoother, because an assessor is taught to evaluate your implementation at the objective level. That's where they score you, and they have to look to see if each one is met. And so here's how I would typically, this is what I would define it as. The means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is defined in the access control policy. I'd probably get fancy with it, maybe give it a bold. If you want to be really clear with everybody, the ACP is linked below in the examine section. You know, so, but you don't have to be, I mean, you know that down below is where that document is. But if an assessor's reading that, or maybe someone else in your company comes in and they're not very familiar with like FutureFeed, but you don't have to be that. But that's how I'd address that, you know. And some people say you have to define it in the system security plan. That's not true. You can define things in policies and elsewhere. But if you choose to define it in your SSP, then you could do that. And then your definition would probably look like, you know, the means of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is defined as 5 attempts in 15 minutes or whatever it is. You know, you can define it here, you can define it elsewhere. My recommendation to you though is just to have one source of truth. Okay, if you define it in the access control policy, only ever define it there and always reference that document. So you only ever have to update it once in one place, and it's very clear what the setting is and what it is, you know, and you don't have multiple different definitions out there floating around and people are mistaken and confused. So okay, so continuing on, right? Like, pretend I didn't have this, like this, let's even say that this was empty for me. I just got access to FutureFeed. I don't have any basic results I'm looking at or old gap assessment results. I'm just doing an analysis myself. So this is going to be empty. Your statements are going to be empty. And I would just read the objectives. So the first one is something defined. We already said, yes, it is. I marked it yes. I created that narrative and I hit publish. It's important to note that now that it's been published, when I generate my system security plan, it's going to have that new verbiage. So just know that publish button is pretty strong, because if I go in here and type, you know, something important in here and I make an update, I'll hit some spaces to trick it. If I don't hit that publish button and I just close out, I mean, that's fine. You could do that. Maybe you're still working on that update revision or that wording, you know, or it's still in draft and you're not ready to publish it. It's not quite approved yet. That's fine. Just know that when you generate your SSP, it's not going to include it. So if you do update it, make sure you hit publish. So it's the approved, published implementation narrative, and it's going to be in your SSP. That's important. Same thing with documents. That's how the documents work. If you're working on a draft document and you're editing it up and making a bunch of changes, don't hit publish. Hit publish when you want to publish a version or create some revision history. Okay. So then I would go to the next objective. The defined means of limiting unsuccessful logons is implemented. So here's the technical validation objective. Operationally, are the operational systems, do they currently have this implemented? And so you're going to need screenshots, configuration baseline report, some sort, policy report, some sort of Active Directory export or report that says that setting is enabled. You can have your evidence can be a few different things. When I did compliance management for the DoD and as a contractor support, I required evidence before I marked things fully met, or took them fully off of my system POAM or my action list. It's just because I know I needed that evidence. Not only did I want to validate that, what needs to be done is implemented. So at your company, if you have an expert on the requirements or you yourself are that person, you might want to establish a process in your company that in order for POAM items to be, marked complete, or for control requirements to be marked fully met, like we have to have evidence, and maybe this person at my company needs to see that evidence because they understand the requirements and they need, they're going to be the ones to validate if it's fully met. But anyway, you'll need evidence, if not for yourself, definitely for an assessor. Okay, when the C3PO assessment team comes around, they want your initial set of body of evidence, and the more you can give them, and if you're very clear with your evidence and this piece of evidence goes to this requirement, it's gonna really help things move a lot more smoothly during your assessment. So excuse me. um Let's see what I put here. So I said, in this fake environment, we have a firewall and we have servers, and it looks like I forgot to address my Windows assets. So let's pretend I have Windows endpoints. What I'm trying to get at here is for, hold on. Sorry. Can you guys still see my screen? Good.
Yes.
Yeah, I see
Okay.
it.
What I'm trying to get at here is I just want to make sure I let you guys know, or, speak to this, because I see this a lot in the assessments I've done as a lead CCA. And it leads to a lot of failures. Um, Failures in SSP documentation, or just defining implementation method fully. Right? Because let me go back to the control. There's a control that requires you to have a system security plan, and it's 312.4. And in here it says that you have to define boundary, environment, list out the security requirements, and the method of how those requirements needs to be described and documented in the system security plan. So, to some level, we have to define how these requirements are implemented. And that's exactly what we're doing, in these summary notes here and in the objectives. And so an assessor for, environments that have many different asset types, like if you have an on-prem server that's storing, processing, or transmitting CUI data, and you're also printing that data, so there's a printer in scope, And maybe you're using an application and the data is also being stored in a database for that application. And you're also emailing it. So you gotta, end up getting a bunch of different asset types that are storing, processing, and transmitting information. It's your responsibility to make sure that this requirement of limiting unsuccessful logon attempts is implemented on all of those systems that store, process, or transmit COI data. So, um, make sure, I just wanted to, bring this up when you're writing your system security plan narrative for your own benefit of identifying if there's a compliance gap, as well as for the benefit of your assessment process. Address the implementation of the technical implementation for all of the asset types in your environment like I'm doing here. So make sure to address Windows or the Apple devices that your users use. How does that tablet implement the requirements? How does their phones implement the requirements if they're in scope? How does your Linux server versus your Windows server implement it? It's different. Not everything's domain joined. Some of these assets are going to be managed independently and they're going to have a management interface. Typically, your firewalls have a management interface. So you have firewall administrators. Well, that management interface, when your firewall administrator logs into your firewall, they're logging in username and password, right? What's the limit of unsuccessful logon attempts there? Um, and a big failure is when we would go to an assessment, they would only address, the Windows endpoints and how those are picking up the requirements. And then based on discussion and the scope of their environment, they would fail to address, how their server is or how their firewall or that their, that kind of stuff. So, or their file server, all that stuff. So here's how I kind of would address it. Maybe this is too much because some of this was straight from chat GPT. This is a fake test environment, so a lot of this data gets generated quickly and just we delete it out a lot. But just make sure, how is it implemented on every asset type. If that implementation's the same, then one statement's fine. But if it's different, then address it. Implementation method, that's what you got to hit. Okay, so here, let's say your company, I'm not a tech guy. So if I'm at your company, I would want to speak with your system admin and I'd say, hey, is this implemented? I want proof. So hopefully they can jump on a meeting with me and just share their screen and show me that they've implemented, or they can send me a screenshot or something. But me personally, I want proof. And so I would mark it met, just because during our interview, during our discussion, they said it was implemented. I'm going to take their word for it. But I do want to follow up and make sure I get that evidence for myself as well as the assessment. And so I would mark it met and figure out a way to track that evidence request. And what do you want to do? So one thing you could do is go down and find all of the assets. So let's say I need that screenshot from my firewall. Then in here in my task, I'm going to say, here I created one for a different training, please give screenshot for whatever, assign it to that system admin who can get me that screenshot, give them a due date, and hit submit. So now it's logged somewhere. I'm not going to forget about it. Mina, the system administrator, is not going to forget about it, because when I log into FutureFeed and I go to my dashboard, I'm going to see that I have an open task. And so they will be able to, Mina will get a notification that she has a task, and she'll click on this, and then she's gonna either attach and upload or link to or copy and paste that evidence into FutureFeed. And then when they close that out, that evidence gets stored over here. Okay. And so that's where you're going to want to create your tasks. I've seen people do that, is if you need that follow-up evidence, for my firewall, I'll create a task. If I need it for my domain controller, I'll create a task in my Entra ID entry to get that screenshot. If I need it from an application, I'll create it in my application entry to get the paperwork on that application or validation for them, screenshot. If I need my access control policy to be updated, let's say they didn't define something in here. It didn't define what I needed it to. So I'll create a tasks, making sure, requesting that the document get updated to include that definition. So that's where you're going to create your work, is in the tasks. But you can mark it met. I would just say try to make sure you do the tasks. Some people just leave it as unknown, and then once those tasks are created, they'll mark it met just for like making sure purposes. Also, some people are a little more lenient on their POA&Ms. I've seen companies that are very strict with what can go on their POA&M, and then some companies that really utilize their POA&M as kind of like a to-do list. And so you can mark things met and still create a POA&M, and in that POA&M you request the screenshot. Okay. You could do that because you can have I have now one open POA&M item for this objective. It's still in a met state. It's not going to impact your score. And now it's on your POA&M and it's going to be completed at some point, but it's not impacted your score. So it's your call. But do try to get that evidence because you'll want that for your assessment. So evaluate, and that's the importance of, as you were logging your tools and your documents, you were connecting the requirements, because now your goal is to go through the requirements one at a time, review the requirement, review the objective, review if you have any attached documents or assets, and start identifying things that are not met or met and collecting that evidence. And very, very important to develop out these objective statement narratives as well as this summary note narrative here. That is essentially what you want to tell any assessor, internal or external, about the process. Think about your SSP is not only for your assessor, it's for you as well. It's your guidebook, it's going to be your playbook. When you have to do an assessment, an annual security control assessment, an internal one, you got to do your annual SPRS attestation. The affirming official will have to do that. You're going to have to do an annual security control assessment per the per the the CA family down here. There's this one, periodically assess security controls to determine if they are effective in their application. So write your SSP to make sense for you as well, or the person who's going to be doing that internal assessment every year. Because every year they're going to have to go into the SSP, read how it's implemented, and then go speak to the right person, make sure it's still implemented, maybe gather new evidence just so you can always have a updated body of evidence. Mark things failed if they failed. If the process isn't working and the control's not working, something's failed, right? So put that on your POA&M and start figuring out what the failure was and work on it. Anyway, I don't know where I was going with that. Any questions so far?
All good.
Nope, all good here too.
All right, so that's the assess page. I think we pretty much covered it. You have a lot of built-in helpful. Do visit, watch the video if you need a little, understand a little bit more about the requirement, the intent behind it. You have these guidances here you could reference. You have down here under the examine, there's another video that talks about the evidence for the requirement, this one in particular, 318. So check them out. Um, One thing you'll do also is if you scroll through and you're reviewing and you don't have anything connected, okay? Because when you logged your tools and your documents, you made those connections, um, not everything probably got a connection, right? So you're gonna have some blank things. So you'll have to think about, okay, well, what does my company had? Maybe we just forgot about a document, completely forgot to log it. If that's the case, go back to the document section and log that document as an entry and then map it to that requirement. But also maybe you just didn't link something at the time because you weren't doing the tagging, or you didn't think about this requirement. So you could just hit plus and link to what you have. So do try to, if it's blank, if it's empty, your goal is to get evidence. And so maybe you forgot to link it and you're going to hit plus and connect it, or maybe it's just not yet in FutureFeed and it's on a to-do list. And you got to put it in there, in which case go ahead and make a POA&M. Hey, I forgot that the company has this technical control plan policy. I need to see if it meets the requirements and all that stuff. So, or you could go over and make a shell of a document, like make one of these new ones, and then it's just going to be empty and wouldn't have a document in here, but you could still make a task over there. And then after you're done assessing, right? So you did your tools, you did your documents, you did your assessments, you're gone. The whole assess page is 100% complete. You've gathered all of your evidence. You've created all the POA&Ms for the issues and the tasks. Then when you move over to your SSP is going to be pretty dang accurate, right? At this point in time, if you've put in the work in the first 4 subway stops. And so now what you're doing in your SSP is you're reviewing it, you're editing it, and you're approving it. But also it's going to be able to help you identify where there's still some work needed. I do understand this assess page. This takes weeks. I mean, if you're actually doing assessment and you're validating things yourself and you're not just copying and pasting results from an old assessment or a basic assessment, a good assessment of even a good basic assessment should take a few weeks, right? And so it may take you some time to populate this. Well, over in your SSP area under the requirements, you're going to also see that there's some area for improvement and work that needs to be done. You know, if you don't have all the scope information filled out, you're going to see red, as you see here, something's not done. So you're going to get to see where you still got to address stuff in your overall system security plan. And so red means something's not been done and there's alerts. Here's what you got to do. So most of the sections of FutureFeed, or I'm sorry, most of these sections here in this system security plan are being pulled from other areas of FutureFeed. So this scope system, if there's something wrong here, let's say our unique identifier is wrong, we'll just hit this edit button and we'll go back to it and change that information, update it. And now when I go back to my SSP, it's been changed like that. So most of it is just clicking on the pencil and it's going to go to a different section in FutureFeed for you to populate that information. Most of the scope is, and even the requirements. If you have to make a change to the requirements, like the status or the implementation narrative or the evidence, you're going to do that up here in the assess page. And you can click on the edit and it will just bring you over there. But it's nice to know if you have an assessment, if you know, when you have your C3PO assessment, your assessor, if they're comfortable, they may be comfortable with accessing FutureFeed, and so you'll give them access to your FutureFeed environment, but you're going to give them assessor access. There's a specific role called the assessor role you'll give them. When they so that way when they access your environment, they only see this SSP area here. That's the only thing they see. And they see this one nice graph here, this chart. So they see this graph and this SSP area because that's all they need to see is your compliance and your SSP and your evidence. So if I'm an assessor and I'm doing an assessment of your environment, I only see your SSP, and this is how I'm going to review your evidence. So I'm going to go to the requirements section and I look at the control. I'm going to be able to read what you said here. I can't edit it. I can't make any changes, but I'm going to be able to read what you say here. I'm going to see who I need to interview as an assessor. These are all my people that I could potentially interview. And then it's going to start going into the requirements. And here's objective. They're out of order because it looks like objective B I have marked as not met. So it lists that out, and then it's going to list out my inheritance and my POA&M. My inheritance looks like it's written pretty poor, so I would fix that. But there's my POA&M item because this one's not met. So here it is. Then some additional POA&Ms, but implemented, I have I have the A, C, D, E, F objectives marked as met. And these are all met. And here, if I had my narratives spelled out and it was, typed out in there, this is what, how, and here's all my evidence. So when I start as an assessor, when I start looking at your evidence, this is what I see. I would go click on your policy and I would be able to see just this version here, your working version, but I'll also see this evidence area here. So I'm going to see all of your evidence that you have in there, which is going to be any approved versions of your document, as well as evidence that that document's being followed. Okay. And so that's what an assessor is going to see, is just your SSP. There is some section here in the system this area here that you have to fill out, this section down here. So it's red. I haven't filled it out yet, but you'll do that. But that's all you're doing in the SSP is reviewing, editing, and approving. And you can use this here area if you want to log that. See if I assign this section here to Jeff. This section is a bit different. It's not assigned to Jeff. Each of these sections, you can assign them to different individuals, maybe because they know that information the best. Or if in anything, you could log that I've reviewed it and I've also approved that section of the SSP. It looks good to me. Everything's great for now. Okay. So review, edit, navigate, and approve your SSP is done here. And then after that, you will have a pretty decent POA&M, right? Because you've done all these steps and you've assessed and you've created all the POA&Ms. And now your goal is to keep tracking on, track these POA&M items and keep people working on them, create projects and start engaging the right people for those projects to get the work moving along. If you want to create tasks related to POA&M items, you can do that. Just go back into that tool or into that document and create that task. For example, if your POA&M item is, do we have one here procedure? I have a POA&M item. My risk management procedure is in draft, or I don't have one. And so the task that I'm going to create is in that risk management procedure. I'm going to go here and click on task. For controls, it's a little bit different. So this control here, 311, if I click on this, I don't have that task capability because this was an objective failure. But what was it? Processes are not identified. So I would just go to whatever document or whatever tool relates to, where I'm going to be pulling that process list from or housing that process list, and I'd create the task there. But that's your goal, is to start working on these poems, fill out the metadata, impact, effort, and costs if you want. But, most of the time, if you have a lot of poem items, you're going to need to start prioritizing your work, and what you'll have to figure out where to put your effort first, what poem items need to be fixed first. And you're going to want to make sure you're making that decision based on impact, effort, and cost. So if you didn't, capture that information at the time of creating the poem, just try to, you can see here, it's obviously missing for some. Start working, fill it in, set due dates, and then try to get it part of a project. So that way, instead of working on, tens of 100, hundreds of different poem items, I'm just working on a manageable set of different projects that I have to like focus on throughout the day and check in on, and making sure the work's going. So if you want, I like to do this with my FutureFeed work that I have to do, is I go into the poem and I'll filter by the plus sign. And so anything that has a plus, it's not part of a project yet. So down here, see, these ones are all in a project. Well, then my goal would be to like put them in a project if I can. So what's this one? This one's a technical poem. Oh, so we're gonna buy, for my environment, we're gonna buy this Nessus vulnerability scanner because we have to. There's a requirement. So this is a technical poem. We're gonna be purchasing some technical equipment and installing it. So I would put that one, maybe in my system admin work project. Or if you have to create a new one, create a new one. But that's where I'd put that. And so that way, when I have to work on my poem and I have to put on my poem management hat, I would go to the Your FutureFeed stop and not really look over here on the poem items. I just jump straight into my projects and start reviewing them one at a time down the list, and start making sure we got the people engaged and work's moving and all that stuff. Set up meetings, run a few reports if I have to, go over to the deliverables. In here, we have this cyber readiness report builder or presentation builder. And here is where you can generate some quick reports on data that you have directly in FutureFeed. Okay, so if I need to go, if I just created a new project, or actually let's, what did I just do? I updated a project. I added a new poem item to a project. And so now I should probably let the people that are working on that project know they have a new task, right? A new poem item. And so I want to present that to them. So I'm going to go over here, and maybe I also want to show them, real quick, my score. And then I'm going to go find that project. And here it is. And then I'm going to hit play. And so now it's just going to quickly put together a nice presentation for me. Here's my assessment data that I selected, and my assessment score that I wanted to see. And then here's that project. Oh, I guess one more. That's more about the assessment stuff. Here's the project. And then what do we got? So I added the new one somewhere. Okay, here it is, the tech poem. So, and now I'll talk about it. So that's what you're doing here. This cyber readiness builder is, you could present directly from FutureFeed as I'm showing you here, or I could download that report and email it to someone, or just, for whatever reason. And when you do download it, it looks more like a report and not so much like a presentation. It's pretty nice. Quickly generate metrics and status updates and reports on the stuff you're doing daily in FutureFeed by just clicking a couple buttons, choosing what you want to see. Over here, setting up, executive summary, why we're meeting, who's presenting. Then you select what you want to see. And over here, it tracks history. And you can change up the theme, technical, military, or animal theme, just for fun. Other exports in this deliverables section. Okay, this is where you're making your reports and your presentations, but then it's also where you're going to be exporting your poem if you ever need to. Poem actions and the individual projects. It's also where you're going to be generating and export a full system security report, system security plan report. Just hit download and it runs it. I'm not going to do it because it takes a second. When you do generate an SSP report, it's not the best way of tracking approval quite yet. We're working on it, but what you can track approval of SSPs in FutureFeed. To do that, you just go down into your history and you find that SSP that you just generated in your history, and you'll click on this approve this report button, and it looks like that one's been approved. Let me find one that. So here's an SSP one, and you can delete the approval. So let's delete it, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Jeez Louise, where is it? This one. So here, did I submit my SPRS score? And does that score align with this SSP? Was this SSP the one used to submit that score? Yes or no? Include the highest level owner cage code. I can track some version history. Why did I generate this SSP report? Was there a change? Was I updating a narrative? What was changed? Who approved it? And then if this person has access to FutureFeed, they would go in here. And let's say I'm approving it, I would go down, find me, I'm approving it today, and I'd put my signature, and now I have that report as marked approved. Where is it? Here. And if I click on that, you could see, and there's an approval PDF that you can download with that signature and date timestamp on it. Okay. So play around with that. But you also have the export ability for files and data, all the files, the documents, the attachments you put into FutureFeed, all that data you put into FutureFeed, you can export it here. And when you're ready to engage a C3PAO, run an export here. Run an evidence file export and a data file export and see what it looks like, okay? Because you could use these as that body of evidence, especially this file one. When you download everything, you send it over to them, and that you could use this, but do review what's in it first, and just how it looks so you can understand. It is organized, and there is a export. Like when you export it, it comes in a zipped file, and in that file, there's a Excel spreadsheet where it lists out all of the documents in that export. So it's going to list out all of your evidence, and then it should list out all of the requirements that evidence is associated with. So check it out. It's pretty cool. And you'll use that when you engage your C3PAO. Get this off of there. So that's the deliverables, and that's the rest of FutureFeed. We've covered it. So do you guys have any questions?
No, looks great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I agree. Looks wonderful.
All right. Well, if you guys don't have any questions, we could just end the call a little bit early, and I'm sure you've heard me say this, but feel free to sign up for more of these sessions. Sign up for the Thursday weekly session, or reach out to support@futurefeed.co if you need any more training or have any more questions.
I'm sure we'll be back. Tuesday was the first we logged in, and so we're just learning.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I just threw a lot at you then, so good luck.
No, it's good. Watching what you have there, and I'm logged into ours, and it's good to see what we have to do yet.
Okay. Very good. All right. Well, I hope you guys have a good weekend, and we'll talk at a later date then.
Thank you. You also.
Yeah. Bye.
You too. Thank you very much.